Mark Rogers, TV, back with you on college football as we run down our top 10 defensive linemen in college football heading into 2014. And at number 1, we go to the Clemson Tigers out of the ACC and Vic Beasley, defensive end in his first year as a starter. He racked up 23 tackles for loss and 13 sacks, most sacks in the ACC and third ranked in tackles for loss, again in his first year. He's got a relentless motor. He runs to the football. He pursues the ball carrier. He comes with passion. He comes with force. Again, especially along the defensive front, nobody plays 100% all the time. It's physically impossible. He's about as close as it gets. First team All-American, again, in his first year as a starter. 13 sacks, 23 tackles for loss. Vic Beasley has it all. Could have went to the NFL draft this past season, but he's back at Clemson. At number 2, we go all the way out to the Pac-12 and look at Leonard Williams out of USC, the Pac-12 Defensive Player of the Year in 2012. What happened in 2013 was 6.5 sacks and 13.5 tackles for loss. Decent numbers, really good numbers, but not for a guy with his talent. Well, he had a torn labrum in his right shoulder, so he was basically running around like this, trying to make an impact in the football game, and still did. Well, he missed a lot of action, and when he was out there again, he was at around 65% based on the coach's estimate. Leonard Williams is now healthy, so look out. He had over 20 tackles for loss and almost 20 sacks 2 years ago. Expect those kind of gaudy numbers for USC in 2014. Now we go out to Michigan State. The Big Ten champions boast Chiliqui Calhoun. Calhoun had a huge season, scoring touchdowns. He tied all defensive players across the country with 3 defensive touchdowns and showed off his speed in the open field on a few of these plays. Okay, he doesn't have elite speed. He basically fights you in a phone booth. This guy is a fighter. He's an exceptional player. Of course, he was the Big Ten Defensive Lineman of the Year and first team Big Ten defensive first team. Also, he was second team All-American. He had 14.5 tackles for loss and 7.5 sacks. Chiliqui Calhoun is an exceptional player for the Big Ten champions at Michigan State, followed closely by Randy Gregory. Coming out of junior college in his first season in big-time major college football, 19.5 tackles for loss and 10.5 sacks for Randy Gregory. He finished it off strong in Big Ten play, racked up most of those numbers once he got comfortable with the defense and really let loose in Nebraska. So it's Randy Gregory, first team All-Big Ten player, and a guy who really runs to the football, is very fast and relentless after the football and comes off the edge for Nebraska. At number 5, we go to a freshman in 2013. Joey Bosa was so impressive for the Buckeyes out of Ohio State, and he got better and better as the season went along and finished off with a strong Orange Bowl against Clemson when his running mate on the other side, the much more heralded Noah Spence, was out of action due to a suspension. Joey Bosa racked up 7.5 sacks and 13.5 tackles for loss. His stats may go down. I don't expect them to go down, but the reason that they may decline just a little bit, Ohio State's got a new defensive line coach in Larry Johnson from Penn State, and he wants to play a ton of guys up front for the Buckeyes. He believes that you can downgrade the position just a little bit at each spot if you bring in fresh players, and they're going to play better than tired, more talented players. So get me here, Joey Bosa is probably going to go from about 70 plays per game to about 40 to 50 for the Buckeyes. But again, 7.5 sacks and 13.5 tackles for loss for a freshman. Joey Bosa, very impressive for the Buckeyes. Number 6, we go to the national champion Florida State Seminoles and Mario Edwards. The stats were not gaudy. He's a much better player than this at 9.5 tackles for loss and 3.5 sacks. Number 1, keep in mind, Florida State blew out everyone until the national championship game, and maybe Boston College kind of hung in there through 3 quarters and only winning by 14. So Mario Edwards missed a lot of action during the season just because he was taking a break on the sideline, and also he's a much more talented player than that. He's going to come on strong for Florida State. They've called him out. Timmy Jernigan not there for Florida State, so he's going to have to be the best player along that defensive front for FSU. And expect those numbers to go way up. Consider in the second half against Auburn, he had 3 tackles for loss in the national championship game. Okay, at number 7, recruiting pundits, this name is going to stand out to you. It's, of course, the number one recruited player, regardless of position, a couple of seasons ago, going to Ole Miss, Robert Nkemdiche. Didn't start the first few games, had significant playing time, but didn't start. Then he got the start, and they cut him loose, and he let go, and he played really well against the run. He was more of a run stopper, even at defensive end. He's got to improve his technique coming off the edge. Just basically a bull rusher at this point. Had 3.5 sacks, 8 tackles for loss. Robert Nkemdiche, we know he's a man already physically. He just has to hone his game and figure out some more moves coming off the edge to improve that sack total of 3.5 in 2013. Okay, at number 8, we go back to Ohio State with possibly the best defensive line in the country. Noah Spence almost made this list, but we go with the defensive tackle Michael Bennett, who might be the top defensive lineman drafted in 2015. Most certainly will be the NFL's top pick at defensive tackle. At defensive tackle, again, the interior guys have less stats. He racked up 11.5 tackles for loss and 7.5 sacks. Now, he does it with quickness. You think of tackles being huge. Well, yeah, he's huge. He's 290, but he's not 320. He does it more with quickness. And again, like Bosa and like Noah Spence, going to play less plays than he's accustomed to playing, so he should be fresher. The stats may suffer just a bit, but he's going to make more impact plays in 2014 for the Buckeyes. At number 9, we go to Missouri's Markus Golden. Consider, he only played 40% of the snaps for Mizzou last season, still racked up 13.5 tackles for loss and 6.5 sacks behind Michael Sam and Coney Ealy. Markus Golden's a player. He's big, he's fast. He's probably, I'm going to say he's most likely the fastest D end on this list. I know it's very close. Gregory has a burst. Leonard Williams, yeah, you could go on down the line. But I'm going to go with Golden possibly in a foot race with the rest of these guys. He runs a 4.55 40-yard dash. Okay, we stay in the SEC to finish up the top 10, and we go to Arkansas. The Hogs with all sorts of problems on the field, but not at defensive end, where they lost Chris Flowers or Chris Smith going to the NFL draft, but they still have Trey Flowers, who thought about coming out. He rated out to a 3rd-round grade based on the NFL Draft Advisory Board's research. 8 sacks, 13.5 tackles for loss. He's put on 15 good pounds, and so he's going to stand up to the run a little bit better this season. And Trey Flowers has been held out of all the scrimmages in the spring and the spring football game for Arkansas. He's healthy. They just don't want to nick this guy up, so he's ready for 2014. There you go, top 10 in the land. And keep in mind, we've got our description section filled with our honorable mention guys. So you see a number of guys that we've got listed down there that just didn't quite make it. I'm going to throw out Noah Spence. I just did, but we're also going to throw in Oklahoma's Charles Tapper, who was exceptional. First team All Big 12, had 5.5 sacks, like 10 tackles for loss, and we especially saw him show up against Texas. And even though Oklahoma lost that game, he had some ridiculous plays off the edge. And for Capper also against Alabama in the Sugar Bowl. But it's Beasley out of Clemson at number 1. Then you've got Williams, USC, Calhoun, Michigan State as the Big Ten goes on a run here with Gregory out of Nebraska and Ohio State's Bosa. Then the bottom 5 go Mario Edwards, Florida State, Robert Nkemdiche out of Ole Miss, Michael Bennett, Ohio State, Markus Golden, Mizzou, and Trey Flowers, the Arkansas Razorbacks. That's our top 10. Mark Rogers TV. We now need to hear from you. Give us your list of top 10 defensive linemen in college football heading into 2014.